You know, there's something wonderful about living out in the country. God designed people in the very beginning for country living. He took the first man and he put him in a garden. There's just something about being out in nature surrounded by the things that God made that is so much better for our bodies and our souls. Even the natural remedies that you find listed in that New Start equation, 5 or 6 of those out of 8 are enhanced by country living. You get fresh air, you get sunshine, you get the exercise, the water, the nutrition if you're eating out of the garden. I came to this valley called Covelo just about 40 years ago, right at 40 years ago. This piece of property here, a friend invited me up to go into the wood selling business, selling firewood with him. And he had some issues with his family and he took off and he left me with the payments. And our family was able to buy this land 1 generation ago, a Bible generation, 40 years. And in that time, we've just learned a lot about living off the grid. Now, I don't know everything, but I thought I'd put together this program with the help of some of our Amazing Facts crew here and to share with you what I know about country living. Go to where you can look upon the works of God. Find rest of the Spirit in the beauty and the quietude and the peace of nature. You hear that? That's the sound of life. You have to have water. Jesus said, I am the water of life. And it's really important. It's a foundational thing. You don't want to buy a piece of land if you don't have water. If you have 1 gallon of water running from a spring a minute, which is just a very small amount, that's 1,400 gallons a day. That right now is probably running at 5 gallons a minute, so thousands of gallons a day, plenty for orchard and garden and everything you'd need, lots for household use.
In America, the average household of 4 uses approximately 400 gallons of water per day. 70% of that is used indoors, with the bathroom being the largest consumer.
In the summertime, when I want to see how much water I've got in my tank, I just take a rock and you can tap it. Right now they're full, so it's a dead sound. You get up there, you can tell it's hollow. Water's right about here now. And we run it into the tanks through a filter. This is my little cleaner. Every now and then I'll pop the filter off. I won't do it now because there's so much water it'll just spray everywhere. Pop the filter off, I kind of clean out the screen, so if there's any little bugs or water wigglies that get in there as sand, it catches it here, and then I got a secondary filter at the house. And we have this bungee like this because bears like to come through here. You'll see there's bear claws. They hear the water running, they think there's bugs or something in there, and they'll pull the pipes off. So we've had to patch this several times because of our friendly bears. I was walking through the woods here once about 35 years ago with my son, who was real little. We saw a wet spot on the ground in the summer. That's usually a good sign that there's a spring. So you dig down, you find where the clay is, where the main source of the spring is. You lay your sewer line in there, it's the perforated pipe in there. Throw gravel on it, cover that over, get it all nice and sanitary. So that's the water coming down the hill from one spring. It's backing up brown here because I just stirred up the silt on the bottom of the pipe, otherwise it'd be perfectly clean. And some of this is coming from this spring now. And before it goes down to the tanks, I've got a trap here that just catches gravel. See the little gravel that comes out of the bottom of that? It's probably got gold in there. Just keeps your filter clean. And that's that. High tech. Let the eye rest upon the green fields, the groves, the hills. Look upon the blue sky unobscured by the city's dust and smoke, and breathe the invigorating air of heaven. The Bible says that the life of man is the tree of the field. These are some pear trees that actually the homesteaders that lived here 100 years ago planted these. You can see the pears are coming out. Now sometimes, some years, Karen and I don't get to them in time, and the bears, that's why the trees are a little gnarly. They've ransacked the trees. But 40 years we've been here, these have been putting out pears. Some years are better than others. And you can see right over here, we've got plum trees. Some of these are volunteer and we just let them go. Nice thing about these trees is if you don't like the variety, almost all of them you can graft them. You could put whatever kind of pear you want on that tree if you get a little grafting training. Here you see little plums. Any of these stone fruit trees, you can graft with a variety of other plums. And so you say, well, I don't like these. Cut it back, graft it with the kind you like, and if it's got good rootstock, it just takes off.
Grafting is a technique in horticulture in which a branch from one tree is attached to the rootstock of another. It's also rather common to see multiple types of fruit from the same family grafted to a single rootstock. In fact, an artist in New York has recently grafted 40 different types of stone fruit on the same tree. Depending on the time of year, the tree of 40 fruit can have multiple varieties of cherries, peaches, almonds, and plums.
These are more pear trees and apple trees, blackberries. You look around the meadow there, you'll see there's volunteer plum, berries, rose hips. The Lord's just blessed because we're not here to manage it very much, but the animals spread the seeds, so they just kind of come up volunteer.
Then the trees of the field shall yield their fruit, and the earth shall yield her increase. They shall be safe in their land, and they shall know that I am the Lord.
You know, one of the other things you can do in the country, when we first moved up here, we had some goats. These are actually our neighbor's goats. They'll eat just about anything, and they'll clear the land. And of course, goat's cheese, goat's milk doesn't have some of the same problems as the lactose that you have in regular milk. You need to have dogs if you can have goats in the hills, because bears like goats also. The Bible says in Proverbs 27:27, you'll have goat's milk enough for your food, for the food of your household, and the maintenance of your maidens. You know, one of the things you can choose to do if you want, if you have some chickens around your house, if you're living in the country, they're excellent for eating all of the insects around your garden. If you want an organic garden, they eat the bugs, they'll even eat some of the dangerous insects, they'll eat scorpions. And they also produce fertilizer, and naturally, a little group of chickens like this, you'll get your daily quota of protein in the egg. He agrees 100%.
Chickens that are considered to live in a free-range environment can produce about 230 eggs a year if the conditions are optimal. You can expect that number to fall by about 10 to 15% for each year the chicken ages.
You know, a question that many people ask when it comes to country living and living off the grid is, how much food should a person store away in the event of some calamity? Here we've got some 5-gallon buckets of supposed to be long-term whole wheat. Must be 15, 20 years old right now. We honestly don't know if it's any good. And to tell you the truth, there's food that we stored that over the years has gone bad. So if you're going to store some food, and you shouldn't be storing years and years of food, I don't think. But if you're going to be storing some food, be careful to date it and rotate and cycle through it so that you don't have the waste of money. But I want to be very clear, knowing these things about country living and having some food stored away and being able to live off the grid, it's not going to save anyone. We're not going to be saved by Pelton wheels and solar panels. The only thing that's going to save us in the last days is a relationship with Jesus. You could be in the middle of a city, and with Jesus, you're a lot safer than being out in the country without Christ. One of the very important things if you're going to live out in the country, unless you've got a place that is warm all year long, you're going to have some cold weather, you need firewood to keep from freezing to death. When the time comes you got to build a fire, it's nice to have some kindling. The Douglas fir is not really a good hardwood for fire, but it's great for kindling because it's got pitch in it. So I'll show you real quick how I make my kindling. You can pop it with a maul, and then after you get some slivers with the maul, and you just start. It doesn't take very long before you start going from 5 fingers to 4 fingers. Up here in this country, we got oak, we got madrone, we got Douglas fir. Douglas fir for the kindling, oak and madrone for the long fires. Puts out a lot of BTUs, a lot of heat.
Pacific madrona, or madrone, is a species of tree native to the western coastal areas of North America. From British Columbia to California, the red papery bark peels naturally and makes the tree easy to spot.
The important thing with the stove, you want to be able to shut it down and seal it. If you got a leaky stove, you can't control the airflow, you can't control the wood burn, you waste a lot of energy. You'll notice this has got a draft underneath it, it's pulling air in, it's still burning. Watch what happens if I close this off. You'll see the fire almost completely shut down because I'm robbing it of oxygen. Open it back up again. Hopefully I didn't put the fire out. Most stoves, when you open and close your damper, it's just taking room air into the stove, up the chimney. It's creating a vacuum in your house that is pulling cold air in from the outside. This stove was designed so that the intake is underneath the stove. I put a piece of stovepipe underneath it, goes right through the floor. It's taking the outdoor air from below the house through the stove, back out again. So it's just radiating heat. It's not sucking cold air in from the outside. Boy, it's really nice to have a good wood cook stove, and you can't beat when it's cold and wet outside to sit by a glow of a cozy fire and pluck the guitar. A real important thing when you're using a chainsaw to keep it sharp, you'll notice as I'm going through, I can feel when I'm getting to the bottom, and I'll peel this piece like this. So I break it off before I have to go all the way through, because if you touch the ground for a second, you got to sharpen your saw. So keeping a saw sharp makes a big difference in how well it cuts. It's a lot easier to sharpen the chain if you have a vise, because then you just get it in here and you do one side at a time. Let me get it where they, there we go. Do one side at a time, and use a chainsaw file. I do it freehand with, these has guides on it so you get roughly the right angle. I use like the 30%. Take the saw, you line up that line there with the bar so they're parallel, and just a couple of strokes. And after you do one side, you can take your fingernail and you go like this. It'll shave a little bit off your fingernail, and that means it's sharp. Yep. And you flip it around and you do the other side. Having a sharp chainsaw uses less fuel, less time, easier on the machine.
If the axe is dull and one does not sharpen the edge, then he must use more strength. But wisdom brings success.
Something else to consider when you're living up in the country. If you have a piece of property that has a little bit of timber on it, you can get one of these one-man mobile lumber mills, and you can mill your own lumber, saving a lot of money. And you can do full dimension if you want to, which makes it a little thicker and stronger. Anything from, 1x lumber to 4x4s to 4x8s, and you can make beams, and you go buy lumber now and you'll see that really saves you a lot of money. You get your log, set it down in the middle, you stake out the rails on either side. You've got cranks here. You can crank up the measurements. On both sides you have cranks, and they've got tape measures, and it tells you the dimension that you're cutting. And you make one cut going horizontally, and then after you get to the end, you throw the bar like this, you turn your saw blade, and now it'll make the vertical cut, and it'll cut and separate the lumber that way. So you just keep working your way, and you can cut your way through, a 4-foot log, one piece at a time, with a simple little mill. So when you're living in the hills, having a good shop is really important, if you can do it. What we did in our case is we built the shop first, and then as we were building the house, we had a place to fix things, fabricate, store materials, keep them dry, and just some basic things that are very helpful. We have a gas welder and we have an electric welder. You can fabricate almost anything out of metal. Electric welder, you might be thinking, how do you do that? Well, we got a pretty substantial generator, because if you're using a welder, you need 240 volts. Air compressor, a lot of tools. I reuse nails. I'll take nails and I'll bang them and straighten them out and reuse nails. And so you just try and be as practical as you can, and having tools, being able to fix things, so you don't have to run to town every time something breaks. You fix it yourself. Something else important to think about when you're living off the grid up in the hills is communications. Now, when we first moved up here about 40 years ago, there was no cell phone service, there was no telephone. We used CB radios. And the different friends and church members had CBs, and we had like a 50-foot antenna on top of our house, a CB antenna. And all of the different members had their handles. I was caveman, and some of our members, one of them worked at a fire tower on top of a mountain. She was country girl. Another member was Flying Finn. Well, eventually we decided we were going to hook up a regular telephone, and so we bought a whole spool with 2 miles of phone line, and we had to string it ourselves from our house out to the county road where there actually was a telephone line, and we had to maintain it ourselves. And any time during the winter when a tree went down and broke the line, or when a squirrel chewed through it and it shorted out, I had to walk the line. You've heard of linemen before? I was a lineman. I had to walk the line 2 miles, sometimes in the rain and in the snow, to find the break in the line to restore communications. So after years of doing that, you can imagine how happy I was when finally cell reception reached the hills around here. And Mrs. Batchelor wasn't able to join us on this trip because there just wasn't room for the gear and the crew in the plane. I'm going to see if the phone works, and I'll give her a call. Now, whether she'll pick up or not, I don't know. That's a different problem. Voicemail.
Hi, you've reached Karen Batchelor. I'm sorry I'm not able to take your phone call right now, but please feel free to leave a message, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Hope you're having a great day, or night, for that matter. Bye. At the tone, please record your message. When you've finished recording, you may hang up or
maybe communications aren't such a great thing. Hi dear, we're up here taping in the hills and gave you a call. Love you, wish you were here. There's this section of our land where we didn't have any springs, and so about a year ago we decided to drill. It's a very good idea, if you're going to do this, to spend a little extra money and pay a hydrologist, somebody who will survey the area, find out where other people are finding wells. You can spend a lot of money drilling a well at $15 to $20 a foot, and if you have a dry well, you still have to pay them, and you have nothing to show for it. A hydrologist usually can study the geology, they know what's going on with other wells in the area, and give you a pretty good educated estimate about where to drill and what your odds are. When we put this one in, he was right on. He said about 185 feet, you'll find 13 gallons a minute.
The amount of groundwater reserves in the United States is estimated to be at least 33,000 trillion gallons of water. This is equal to all the water the Mississippi River has dumped into the Gulf of Mexico for the past 200 years.
And it's always fun to just take a little rock. Sometimes you can tell about how deep the well is. It takes about a second for the rock to go 100 feet. Are you ready? You got audio? Here we go. That's a beautiful sound.
Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. For yea, the Lord is my strength and song. He also has become my salvation. Therefore, with joy, you will draw water from the wells of salvation.
If the contour of your land is appropriate, you could actually take a dozer and dig a pond like we did here. This was just all meadow here, but because there's a spring up the hill, And because it catches some of the watershed, we were able to cut this out. And this pond holds water year-round. We come up here and we see deer and bear and ducks, and we even put a half a dozen bass in here, and they just took off and proliferated. Of course, I'm a vegetarian, but it's fun sometimes to catch them and just throw them back. If in the summertime you find this grass, this is called spring grass, and there's a good reason for that, it usually means that there's water not very far below the surface. You'll also notice sometimes that in the summer, bees are landing nearby. That's because bees just need a little moisture on the surface to drink. They don't like running water. But years ago we saw this spring grass here and we were suspicious, so we got a backhoe and decided to dig a hole and see what would happen. And once you remove the topsoil, you remove the pressure and it comes to the surface. This stays full and running over year-round. Now, we don't use this for the house because it's a little ways from the house, but we developed it to be a wildlife spring because where you've got water, you've got life, and Jesus is the water of life.
Jesus answered and said to her, "Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life."
While we're talking about water, one of the ways that you can put in a well is if you know you've got water or spring water pretty close to the surface. What we did here, we got a backhoe, dug down a fairly deep hole, put the culvert in, stood it up straight, packed the dirt in around it. If you want to, you can drill holes in the side so that the groundwater will come in. You can usually get a good clean supply of water. Then if you put a solar powered pump here, you can pump the water from your source up the hill or to a tower, and it'll give you a water supply to your house or to your garden. You can pump your water with a windmill, you can pump of course with a gas powered pump, and you can pump with electricity. Maybe it's a good time for us to talk about electric power in the hills. It's kind of exciting that in recent history, man has developed the technology to convert the sun's power into electricity. And so living in the hills today, you can have virtually all of the modern conveniences that run on electric power. You want to consider when you're looking at land, if you have a piece of sky that's exposed to the southern horizon, so you get good solar power. This is a very simple array. These are Siemens panels, and they convert the power into 12 volts, goes into 12-volt batteries. Depending on how many panels you have and how many batteries you have to store the power, you can have a pretty good storage of electricity. So we'll take a little look at the power room here. And so in this box, you've got your batteries. Right now, we don't have that many. I've had it where it's full of batteries before when you're living here. Green light means batteries are charged. This then converts the 110, it converts the 12 volt rather to 110. And from there, it goes into a regular breaker box that you'd see in most houses. This is where the battery charger comes from the hydroelectric. It puts power into the batteries. This is where the power is coming in from the solar panels on the roof. And you've got a disconnect in case for some reason you should ever want to disconnect that. Little voltage regulator here so that your batteries don't overcharge. Power from the sun coming in to the batteries. Batteries then go in this box, turn it to 110, power your house.
The electrical efficiency of basic household appliances has made huge leaps within the last 30 years. A 1980s refrigerator uses about 4 times more power than a modern energy-efficient one, and modern LED lights produce about 100 lumens of light per watt, compared to the old incandescent bulbs, which produced 13 to 18 lumens of light per watt, making LED bulbs 5 times more efficient.
3/4 of the year, you have plenty of sunshine. The solar panels keep your batteries charged. But in the winter, at least in Northern California, you can have a few months of rain and some clouds, but you get a lot of water then. Well, if you've got a drop on your land, then you can turn that water into power. And this is a little shed. It's going to be a mess in here right now. I know it looks like an outhouse. It's just holding the little Pelton wheel. So we've got a jet of water that comes in here, a jet of water that comes in here. They both hit this bronze Pelton wheel. They spin it, produce 110 volts, and it sends that voltage through that wire back up to the house to a battery charger that charges our batteries up. Nice thing is, you have so much water in the winter, you can leave it running for hours, or you can just set a timer on it and say, I'm going to turn it on for 2 hours, and you get 2 hours of charging your battery. So you turn your water pressure into electricity in the wintertime.
The Pelton wheel is known as an impulse water turbine. It was invented in the 1870s by Lester Allen Pelton. While other water turbine designs existed before the Pelton wheel, they were far less efficient. The Pelton wheel is the preferred turbine design for hydroelectric power plants today.
Well, friends, it is possible to live completely off the grid and be fairly comfortable. It takes some wisdom, it takes some planning, and I'll admit I'm a little conflicted because we have a great work in the city. Most of the people in the world now live by the centers of population. But the Bible tells us that someday, Matthew chapter 24, the abomination that makes desolate will be set up, and those that be in Judea, Jesus says, flee into the mountains. There'll be a time we need to flee. You pray. It's not wise for a person to just say, I'm going to sell everything I have and go move to the hills. You need to be practical. You need to make sure that you have a way to support yourself and you don't lose your opportunity to witness to the people where they are. So I hope that you've been blessed and encouraged. I hope it's been edifying and educational to come into the Batchelor pad up here in the hills and just see how the Lord has guided and taught us through the years, and keep us in prayer as we try and share the gospel with the world.